Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us all, everybody, today. It is the first time that we're seeing so many of you. We welcome you to ISLA's Townhall meeting on cyberbullying workshop here with the Islamic Schools League of America with our guest panelists, two of whom are from the Family and Youth Institute, with whom we've collaborated to provide this really important topic to you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I am Shaza Khan. I'm the Executive Director of the Islamic Schools League of America, and I'll be introducing the panelists to you one by one. This is actually more of a town hall meeting. So what we mean by that is that we're here to learn from each other, inshallah. While we do have our mental health specialists and principal as panelists, we also know that there is a lot of on the ground issues, scenarios, case studies, as we would call them, that you are facing and dealing with, and we are here to learn with you and from you as well, inshallah. Today, inshallah, we're going to be having this conversation with you who are probably principals, teachers, perhaps your parents as well of Islamic school students. And we hope that this is the beginning of the creation of more resources, inshallah, some collaborative work that we're going to do with the Family and Youth Institute here at the ISLA, and that they will probably be really leading as an organization that does so much to provide toolkits related to this, and that we will further disseminate to you as well, inshallah, on this growing issue and area of concern. So Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, thank you so much. Of course, this cyberbullying town hall meeting is part of ISLA's monthly meetings with Islamic school educators. So if you're not already part of the ISLA's email listserv, please join it. It's a place where we can discuss issues and topics. Sister Lisa, who is ISLA's program manager, is going to place here the link to join the email listserv, or I can actually do it too, I think. There you go. So that's right there in the chat. And also, if you want to take a minute to post your name, your role, and which state you're calling in from, zooming in from, please feel free to do that as well, inshallah. So we're going to go ahead and get started, inshallah. As I mentioned, the agenda is a little bit different in the sense that we're going to get right into the questions. And I want to begin by asking Dr. Madiha Tahseen, inshallah. Dr. Madiha Tahseen is a research fellow and community educator at the Family and Youth Institute. She's the research translation manager. So I imagine, Dr. Madiha, that means translating the research from academic papers into infographics and toolkits at the Family and Youth Institute. She holds a PhD in applied developmental psychology from the University of Maryland, and focuses her research on group identity development, parenting, acculturation, and risk and protective factors for Muslim adolescents' healthy development. She's also a board member of an Islamic school. So all of our presenters today have in the past been closely affiliated with Islamic schools. And so we want to keep making that link very clear for you all, inshallah, that here we are wearing these multiple hats and hijabs, inshallah, to bring you some beneficial knowledge, inshallah. Dr. Madiha Tahseen, I want to begin jumping right in. We've only got an hour, less than an hour now, by asking you if you could please define for us what it means for what does cyberbullying even mean? And Dr. Madiha, we don't see you yet on your screen. So if that's something that you could. There you are, Dr. Madiha. Dr. Madiha, if you could just share for us, what is cyberbullying? Can you define that? What does it look like? And what's the broader context in which cyberbullying exists?
Sure. Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me okay? I think I'm having some connectivity issues.
We hear you out in the universe. Yes, we hear you and see you.
All right, I'm gonna keep going as long as it works. Otherwise, I'll transition to my phone, inshallah. So cyberbullying, you know, before I define it, I want to step back and have everybody kind of think about, you know, we look at sort of bullying in this like cyber realm, and some of us, you know, really freak out and we're like, oh man, this is so new, this is so different. And before we get into the specifics, I want us to recognize that we've experienced bullying. This is not a new phenomenon, right? Bullying happened at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? It's a form of attacking another person that happens on a repetitive basis, and that usually involves a power differential. It's just that now it's in a new platform, right? So we just need to think about, because of this new way that it's happening. Shaza, you actually gave a perfect example the other day of that playground has just changed, right? Before it was on the playground, now the playground happens to be the digital world. So I want us to, I'm not saying that to make us think it's not a big deal, it absolutely is. But when we think about the solutions, again, what's the heart, what's the root of it, right? The root of it is still, some form of harassment or bullying or prejudice and biases against somebody else that involves a frequency and it involves a power differential. We always need to remember that. So when you ask what does cyberbullying look like, what are the forms? It's the same as in person, it's just on the digital realm, right? So you're still gonna see different things like, making fun of somebody. You're still gonna see harassment. It's still exclusion, right? Revealing secrets about somebody, right? All these things that still happen in the person-to-person interaction. It's just now that it's happening online, right? And then there's some extra components to it. Again, stalking, but you just do it in the cyber realm, right? So now you see cyber stalking. There's something called fraping, which is where you make fake accounts and you act as the other child, right? Some of us have heard that as catfishing, but it also looks at like as fake, as fraping, hacking, tricking people, trolling people. Again, the key to remember in all of these different kinds is it has to be, for it to be called bullying, right? Not every act of being mean to somebody is bullying, whether that's in person, whether that's online. So it has to be, just like as a reminder, as I said before, there has to be frequency involved. It's not just one time, right? It has to occur frequently and a number of times. There has to be a pattern to it. It also has to have a form of power differential, right? Power differential doesn't just mean like an adult to a child, right? It could be a group of kids to one kid, because there's a power difference there. There's a dynamic happening there of in-group, out-group, and that's really important. And it also has to be something that takes away that child's sense of confidence and feeling safe. So I'm not again saying that to say that you shouldn't be worried when you notice something, but every instance isn't bullying and every instance isn't cyberbullying. We want to be looking for frequency, power differential, and those kinds of things. So to go back to the original question, what is it and what does it look like? It's the same behaviors we saw in person. They're just now on an online platform. Again, it gets worse because now anonymity comes into play, right? When it was face-to-face, you could see the person. It was easier to identify who's the perpetrator of bullying. But when it's online, it's a lot harder to do that. And because it's such a far-reaching platform, the group changes from a few kids picking on this one child to lots of kids. And then it spreads like wildfire. So those are the few things that make cyberbullying a lot more unique and a lot more worrisome than what happens kind of in person. I'll stop there for a second.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Madiha. I think that, we had talked about how bullying has been happening in a conversation that Dr. Madiha and I had. Bullying's been happening since kids have been playing on a playground or in any space together, right? Maybe in the caves, I don't know. So that is something that's been happening, but now the context has changed and the context has allowed for so much more just amplification and ease almost, and the anonymity piece, not knowing who necessarily is doing it, who is perpetrating. At this point, I would like to ask a question to our next panelist here, Dr. Julie Barakat. Dr. Julie was born in Trinidad and migrated to America at the age of 10. Her interest in children and family mental health stems from an early curiosity about human behavior. Mashallah, Dr. Julie holds many degrees and a lot of experience She's a graduate of Boston University social work with advanced degrees from Simmons College. She also has a PhD in education. So she's worked as a teacher, as a teacher trainer, as a social worker, and as a therapist at this point. And I know that there was a question about how are we asking questions. Inshallah, I've got these 3 questions that I wanted to just ask for our panelists right now to start off. But please feel free to post your questions if you're okay with posting them in the chat to everybody. Feel free to do that. Or if you want to message privately myself or Sister Lisa, who are identified as co-hosts here, you can do that and we'll ask the question for you. Or afterwards, after these other 2, after the other 2 panelists have spoken, then we'll allow you to unmute too and ask your questions. Dr. Julie, I know that you've worked a lot with youth and you have interest in supporting vulnerable populations. I want to ask, who are the vulnerable populations when it comes to cyberbullying? Who is more likely to be attacked? And what is the impact from your clinical experience, your experience in the schools of cyberbullying on our children? Dr. Julie, welcome. Assalamu alaikum. Yes, please unmute.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with everyone. And, you know, I always like to start with a personal story if I have a minute just to share. You know, when I was a child, when I was a kid, I know I was bullied. I remember the feeling of being bullied. I remember being called fat. I remember being told my nose was so long. And it was painful. When you're bullied, you're made to feel less than. And the power differential that, you know, Sister just talked about may not necessarily be that person has more than you, but maybe they think they look like what everyone else should look like. And so it can forever impact a child's sense of who they are, how they look, and whether or not they belong. It's extremely powerful. It can last a lifetime if not properly addressed. So this is something I'm sure all of you, parents, everybody on this, in this meeting, in this group, have experienced some form of bullying or know someone who has been bullied, whether it's the traditional bullying that I experienced or the cyberbullying that we're talking about today, which, as was said, is definitely more pervasive, harder to control, because that person can access the cyberspace anywhere, anytime, and disguise themselves. So how do you fight that? You know, I could go home and I could be with my family and say, hey, you know, she said that about me. And my mom would hug me and say, oh, you're okay. But the person, the child, even the teacher who is being cyberbullied, they can't do that. Every time they open their device, there it is in their face. So this is something that why it's so very important for all of us to keep looking at. And so who? The question was posed, who are the targeted audiences in schools? So we need to think very carefully about those vulnerable populations. Anybody can be bullied, by the way, for any reason. But schools can take a closer look at who are the most vulnerable. And when you think about that, you can think, first of all, okay, so who is the most vulnerable at my school? Well, maybe it's the student who is different. So what makes them different? Race, culture. Every Islamic school is different. The minority group in one Islamic school might be Arabs. In another school, it might be Pakistanis. So who are the minority groups? And really pay close attention to whether or not those students are feeling or being targeted. The second is the transfer student, the student who sort of comes in mid-year and doesn't know anybody on the campus. That student is liable, is open target for a lot of kids. And so schools need to pay close attention to their transfer students, how they are oriented to the school and included how they develop that sense of belonging. The recent immigrant child who has come with a very thick accent, very different from the American kids. They feel different. They don't feel like they belong. They don't know the rules of the culture. They don't know all of the slang and the lingo. They don't feel like they fit in. So who's looking out for them? They're a possible vulnerable group. Now we have a lot of refugees coming in. A lot of refugees from a lot of different places fall into that same category with the language and the culture difference. The untraditional Muslim family. What do I mean by that? You might have a Muslim family at your school. The mother is not a hijabi. The father is a very strong, practicing Muslim. These kids are trying to find their way. What happens? Kids see the mother come in wearing a hijab, not worn the way it should be. The kid gets teased, bullied, because it's an untraditional Muslim family. Are we looking at that? Then think about the students whose parents are employed by the school. We have a lot of that in our Islamic schools. And when you think about that, that student is oftentimes harassed because, oh, you think you're better than everybody else. Or it may be the opposite, where that student has the power differential and then becomes a bully. Who's paying attention to that? What about exceptionality? The student who is on an IEP, on a 504 plan. Sometimes there's overt accommodations. They're wearing an earpiece. Everybody knows. Or sometimes there are accommodations that aren't overt. They get extra time on tests, but kids kind of know. Or they get second chance on homework. So then how about the child who's underweight or overweight? The whole body image thing. So we have a whole category of kids, and who is paying attention? So when I think about these groups of kids, and I've met and know many kids who fall into these groups, we really need to think carefully about what we're doing to address what they experience in school settings.
Thank you so much, Dr. Julie. There's a really strong list of vulnerable populations, taking some notes to include in our key takeaways. I know that Sister Lisa also takes notes during this, and inshallah we'll be sharing out our summary with you all. I know that as we're sitting here listening, perhaps eating, just kind of decompressing after a school day, you might not be able to do that. So inshallah we'll be here to send out the resources, the recording with you all, inshallah, afterwards. So thank you so much, Dr. Julie. I see a really good question right here from Dr. Catherine as well in the chat. Inshallah, Dr. Catherine, we're going to address that right now with Sister Rana Khalaf, our next speaker, alhamdulillah.
Shaza.
And so, yes.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make one comment about who's vulnerable, if that's okay, very quick. Sorry, I wouldn't interrupt the Townhall, so I'm trying to make it.
It's a Townhall, go for it.
Sorry. I just wanted to add that it's important to also know, as our schools have different ages, that kids also have different kinds of bullying happening online in different ages. So kids who are younger, the cyberbullying might happen more when it comes to gaming, whereas the older kids, if you've got a high school, it still happens in gaming as well, but a lot of it there is with social media. So it's just something to keep in mind as you're thinking about your unique student populations, that what cyberbullying might look like maybe in your middle school is going to be a little different than your high school or your elementary school. So I just wanted to add that one note, sorry.
No, that's really good. And inshallah, I do want us to talk a little bit about how cyberbullying looks in different ages. Want to ask, so we've talked about what is cyberbullying, how do we define that, and what's the broader context in which it's happening, this digital world that has really taken over. It's such a strong part of even our lives, and even more so our kiddos, and accelerated again because of COVID, subhanAllah. We've addressed how does it impact people, although there's a lot more that we could talk about related to that, even in relation to the kinds of cyberbullying. So we'll go deeper, inshallah. But the next question that we want to talk about is exactly, Sister Catherine, what you've raised here. How do we, partially, how do we change the behavior? But before we even talk about change, I want to talk about how do we even prevent it? So Sister Rana Khalaf is our other panelist here, our third panelist. And she's, subhanAllah, she's a principal of a K through 5 school in Warren, Michigan, Frontier International Academy. She's a community educator at the Family and Youth Institute. And for those of you who've been with the ISLA and have participated in our programs, Sister Rana provided a phenomenal 2 workshops, actually. By popular demand, we were asked to do another workshop on bullying through the Family and Youth Institute and as the community educator over there. And it was at that time that we heard from so many of you saying, okay, you know, that's bullying in the playground or in the classroom, but what about cyberbullying? Tell us more. And so we've been in conversation, alhamdulillah, with that Family and Youth Institute. When you guys asked us, we listened, and we're looking out for those resources. And alhamdulillah, we're so happy to have you here again, Sister Rana Khalaf, speaking to us about, you know, how can we as Islamic school educators and leaders work to create children. We don't create children, but cultivate children who will be less likely to engage in cyberbullying or more likely to rectify their behavior if they do. Sister Rana?
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. I am so happy to be back. And I number one, I am so happy that we are addressing again and again the bullying and the cyberbullying, because alhamdulillah, we're at a point as Muslim educators, whether we are in an Islamic school setting or in any other capacity, that yes, our Muslim youth and our Muslim students and Muslim families, we're not immune to the cyberbullying. It doesn't contradict with our being Muslims and mu'mins and iman and the level of our faith and so on and so forth. So that's being so proactive, and inshallah we'll all benefit from this discussion. So the question is, how do we proactively create communities of learners within our schools and among our families to kind of prevent cyberbullying or make our kids stronger in dealing with cyberbullying? And I'm going to focus on 2 things. Number one, education. As families and as educators and as teachers, principals, board members, it is very, very extremely important for us to be educated about what bullying is. Dr. Madiha mentioned that it is the frequency of the incidents. For example, there's a very big difference between teasing and bullying because of the frequency, or the difference in the power dynamics. One is like whether it's an older student or a bigger student, a football player, more popular girl, and so on and so forth. So there are certain criteria that when we as educators educate ourselves and know the difference, we can deal with the incidents way, way better and stronger and more proactively. And the families, like internet and technology are changing by the minute. Like there's a generation and cultural gap between our kids and us and our students, even high schoolers and middle schoolers. So technology is moving so fast. But again, we really need to put our best effort in educating ourselves about the apps, the games, we don't need to play them, but we need to know what's happening in this cyber world so that we can understand the issues that our youth and students are facing. And then number 3, be there for our students. And I know that Dr. Julie and Dr. Madiha are going, I'm sure with the questions, we're going to go into how to help the targets of cyberbullying. But for now, what I would recommend that we train ourselves as educators to be very good, extremely good listeners, so that when a student come to us with, after being cyberbullied or bullied in the school, we will practice we will have been trained with the best practices to be good listeners and have that empathy. But if I have 2 minutes just I put some notes about how to create that environment proactively before, even like from the beginning of the year. I, as a principal, I'm a big advocate of building a positive environment within every school. And it starts with you as a principal, with you as an educator. You can set the tone, you can set the culture. So for example, because there are newcomers, like Dr. Julie said, and ESL and special ed population in every school, I do, like what we do in our school is we create a kindness crew, which is like from the upper, we are a K-6 school, so our 5th and 6th grade students, we make them like apply for the kindness crew. Why do you want to be in with it from the first month of the school year? We have like the newcomers apply as well, like the new students apply as our returning students. We interview them, we make them feel that, oh, this is like a big thing, and then we go into training. There is a training called Peacemakers or Peer Mediators. It's online. The teachers, like 2-3 teachers, volunteer to educate themselves and be trained. And then they train those students. Those students, the job of those students to make sure that they are in the playground, in the lunchroom. They make sure that everybody's getting along, kind of. And then when there's a conflict, those students are the ones who resolve it. So it takes time, yes, it takes work, but then it becomes the culture of your school. The other thing is we do, Dr. Julie, and that's why what's a great thing to say about the newcomers and the immigrants and the refugees and the many languages in every school, like this is honestly, like, this is a challenge for many schools. So what we do, what everyone can do, like a newcomers club for the first 6 weeks, they meet for donuts like once a week, they play games, teachers and older students, just for them to start their friendships and then be part of the belonging piece, because any child has to feel that they belong, so that they can learn, even like academically they will be successful. So I believe, and from my own experience, that we need to work on proactively building a positive school culture that starts with the admin and the teachers and the parents, and then make it our school culture for the kids, involve them in building this positive culture. I think it's a great tool to prevent cyberbullying and to support those who are targets. So.
That's a really good point. We haven't really talked as much about like who typically engages in that. I'm sorry for all my clicking. I was writing the notes and didn't realize I wasn't muted while you were speaking and messing with formatting. So Ron, I apologize for that. Some really great suggestions, concrete examples of how you and your own school, and I can see like the kindness crew being something that totally works in upper grade school as well. So a lot of times we might think that there's not that transferability, but there is, subhanAllah, in that example as well. You know, at this point, mashallah, we've got 75 people on. I know that you guys have a reason for being here on, you know, the evening after you've worked all day. SubhanAllah, I invite you to please ask your questions, raise your hand using the reactions. We're all Zoom pros now, and ask any questions that you have here. I do have a question here that, and I've got 3 questions, and Lisa, you might have some as well that have been sent to me as direct messages. Somebody says it's hard to notice cyberbullying taking place, right? Like, it's not necessarily happening at school. How can we encourage our students to talk about it? Because sometimes it actually requires like a student, not just necessarily the victim, but perhaps like somebody who knows that somebody is actually cyberbullying someone else. So Jazakallah khair for that Excellent question, brother. Yes, would any of our panelists or other principals or educators like to speak about that?
So
Yes, Dr. Julie.
contribute to that. And I think the main thing is a school has to have a solid in place cyberbullying policy that parents and children are aware of from the get-go. So with a policy in place, kids know what is the expected internet etiquette. They know what they can do, where they can go, what apps they can use, when they cannot. They understand that. And they can also, understand if something happens, just like in regular traditional bullying, if you see something, if you hear something, you say something, you are not a bystander, you're an upstander. Same policies exist for the cyber world. So once a school gets this stuff in place, it becomes, as Sister Rana says, part of the school climate, expectations, consequences are set. There'll be more possibilities that kids will indeed say what's going on or tell somebody else. And if there's that one trusted person that they can talk to, an adult that they trust, hopefully a mental health professional employed by the school, they will tell them.
Yeah, thank you
Can
so much, Dr. Julie. Yes, please go ahead, Dr. Medina.
Sorry, Sheza. I was just going to add that I think I think there's a next step involved after having a clear policy, because that is definitely the first step. But sometimes, especially older students, one, there's a worry of being the snitch, right? Of retribution from your peers and of being the tattletale. And then also there's sometimes a worry that maybe if we say something, now we're not going to have any technology and the adults are going to like overreact and shut everything down, right? So like,
does that happen in Islamic schools? Come on.
Who knows?
So overreacting. Yeah, of
So,
course.
Yeah, so there's some of that. So I think we have to also think about how can we alleviate some of those worries so that students feel comfortable sharing. And some of that might be, I've seen some places have done like anonymous reporting. So that kind of addresses like the fear of being like the snitch issue. So they might have like an anonymous reporting, like an anonymous form online or something, right? Or if you're using Google Classroom, like a little Dropbox, but that's like anonymous, or a physical Dropbox, things like that. I've seen some schools set up those kinds. And then I think the second piece about like being worried that you're going to shut everything down and it's just going to result in no technology, I think that goes back to like that culture piece of building that trust that, one, we're not going to overreact, but two, we also do know what to do as adults in the situation. And we need to build that trust with them. So then they know that if I say something, it's actually going to make a difference. And I'm risking a lot to share, so it better make a difference. That kind of mentality.
Yeah, and if I can add, I do think that as like parents and families, if we are well aware about the symptoms of cyberbullying, the signs that our child is being cyberbullied, I think it's very important. Like if one of the signs that they don't want to use technology anymore, for example, or when you pass by their computer, they just shut the screen so you wouldn't see, or they are like, they're in the room, they don't want to talk. So any of the signs, whether it's bullying or cyberbullying, as educators and parents, once we are noticing those symptoms and signs, and it happened with like in our school, the parent will approach the school that I'm noticing this is what's happening, especially when we were online during the pandemic. So that helps. I think like catch the cyberbullying and then encourage the student to talk about it, that we're noticing this, is there, and use your wisdom and just letting the student talk about what's happening if there's anything happening.
If I could just add one more point to what both sisters have aptly said, in the high school, with the kids, the older students, it's funny, yeah, they're the ones who most seriously need to Let us know when bullying is happening, because that's the age group where suicidal ideation, self-harm happens. So how do we get to know? I love the idea of the anonymous reporting, but I have to say that in the high school, there's always that element of possibly not wanting to share when this type of bullying is happening, even when we know it's happening, because there's a fear that somehow it's going to somehow impact the student being able to graduate, or something negative on their record perhaps. But I think once that climate is set, as Sister Rana and Sister Medea and all of us are saying, once it's all put together, there are solid policies, everybody knows what to expect, teachers are practicing it, parents know what's going on, admin is following up, kids understand this is important. I think that there'll be more, you know, more students in the upper grades saying, you know, this stuff is happening, I can't take it anymore. And yes, it's very noticeable, they'll withdraw. That's like the first sign, you know. So when teachers, when admin, when you're so in tune with your students, you see when they're not being themselves. And you can just check in and, you know, find out, you know, hey, what's going on with you? You don't seem to be yourself. And just start a conversation.
Yeah. And Dr. Julie, you had mentioned earlier that, you know, hopefully there's a mental health professional in the Islamic school that somebody could speak to. Of course, we know, unfortunately, that's not the case in the majority of our Islamic schools. And so, you know, this is a situation where there at least should be somebody designated at the school doing social emotional learning or other work where they can be a trusted person and have the knowledge and ability to help both the victims as well as perpetrators. And sometimes the perpetrator is both the victim and the perpetrator, right? They're a victim of something. And that they can support them in their growth. And I want to bring this back to a question that Dr. Catherine stated. You know, we can identify who is different. We can identify the bullies. Our challenge is correcting the behavior and developing the character of the mean students, i.e., like supporting them in their growth and their development. And we think about the prophetic model, subhanAllah, you know, none of our Sahabi, nobody was perfect. And we have instances where somebody was calling someone a name because of race, and it was pointed out. I mean, what do you all, Dr. Madiha, Dr. Julie, Sister Rana, I wonder if you have anything to share about that. Sister Catherine ends with the question of how do we change the behavior? How, in other words, how do we support the perpetrator and in changing their behavior? And this would apply for both cyberbullying as well as in person.
I can start a little bit and then you know, welcome the other speakers. But I think you have to go back to who is involved in the situation, right? So oftentimes when you look at, even if you just do a simple Google, or you look at some of the school toolkits that are out there about how to stop cyberbullying or stop bullying or what to do when it happens, you know, and the focus is on like reporting and gathering evidence. But I encourage everybody to step back first and look at who all is involved, because there are different strategies that you have to do for each party that's involved, right? So there's the student themselves who was being bullied, right? And so there's different things that you have to think about when you're supporting that student. Then there's also the perpetrator, exactly like you said, who's doing the bullying. And so what do we need to do there? And then there is everybody witnessing, because this is now online. You're not just talking about, you know, it's not just a one-on-one situation. Now you've got other students who are impacted. And so you also have to think about what can you do to support, you know, and kind of debrief from whatever happened for those students as well. So start with the student who experienced the bullying. At the heart of all instances of bullying, there's for the student who experiences a bullying themselves, it's oftentimes it's their self-esteem that's gotten impacted and their self-worth has gotten impacted. So you have to come up with strategies to support them about gaining that back, right? And empowering them instead of you as the adult stepping in and just solving the problem. For the bully or the perpetrator themselves, you have to think about, again, you mentioned story of the Prophet Muhammad SAW and the companions and the heart of his relationships, it was about connection and building a connection. So if you want to work with the perpetrator, you have to first understand why they were engaging in that act without judgment, right? What is it that's happening? Is it something they're experiencing themselves in their home? Is it something they're seeing? Is it, and this is often the case for boys, is it underlying depression? Because in boys, that often presents itself as aggression. So what's the underlying cause? And then build that connection back with them. You don't want to reward, right, bad behavior with more attention. That's not the point. The point is there's a reason why you engage in this behavior, and we need to help you get to that reason and build that back. And so I would encourage you to think about what strategies can you use to build that connection with that child, so that they then are now connected back to the rest of their classmates, and can develop that empathy that's needed. And the last part, and I'll just stop here, is oftentimes when we, especially with little kids, we focus on empathy, but empathy doesn't develop in little kids the way we think it does. It actually takes much longer to develop. So little kids cannot do perspective taking. So if it's a second grader and this happens to a second grader, they're not going to engage, and they don't understand what you're saying when you say, imagine how he must have felt when you did that, or imagine, put yourself in her shoes. They developmentally do not understand that. So older students do get that. Younger students are still learning it, but it's not fully there. So for there, you focus more on their behavior and the impact their behavior has and how to repair that. For older students, you can bring in that empathy, but also what's the underlying reason that they're engaging in that behavior, and then work on that and supporting them through it. So I'll stop there, inshallah.
I just want to add, Madiha, to what you said, just one point, and we have to be very careful to and validate the child or the student who has been bullied, who's the target of the bullying. We have to validate their feelings. So because and many times when a child approaches us, and I keep saying a child, but like a youth, teenager approaches us with their feelings about feeling that they were being attacked, whether cyberbullied or bullied, even if maybe they're mistaken, we don't know, but validate their behavior, listen to how they feel, because this is how they feel. It is not what we know. When you validate their feelings and be there to listen to how they feel and what's going on, you will open doors to help them and to help others. So I think this is extremely important when we listen, not to come up with the solutions and not to come up with excuses for the other people. Like, this is how they felt. This is what we need to focus on.
So may I quickly add to this, sister?
Of course, Dr.
Okay.
Julie.
So one of the things that I think with the perpetrator, and because we are looking at our Islamic schools, we can really, take our Islam and take it, and part of one of the pieces that I like to read when it comes to bullying is the ayah, "Oh, you have believed, let not a people ridicule another people. Perhaps they may be better than them, nor let women ridicule women. Perhaps they may be better than them, and do not insult one another. Do not call each other by offensive nicknames." So taking that and turning that into an Islamic school anti-bullying campaign, for example, where it's not just a week or a month, but it's an all-year thing in collaboration with your Islamic department. This is one way to reach a child using the reason why they're in the school in the first place, to help guide them through our values. I love what both sisters said, and I think with the student who in the older group, where the lack of empathy becomes apparent, that perpetrator is doing this behavior, it's repeating the behavior over and over, they start thinking it's funny. And someone, they need that guidance to bring them back to, hey, hello, this is not funny. This is actually possibly breaking the law. And there are laws for how we ought to behave online. And making them aware of this can also help to keep them, to understand that this is not a funny thing. And this is something that you need to do because it is the law, not to harass and not to intimidate and not to embarrass and not to try to make other people feel less than you, make false accusations. All of that, they need, help them to understand that, while at the same time, using the Islamic principles to guide them back to doing the right thing.
I really appreciate that point, Dr. Julie, because absolutely, we have so much richness in our tradition, alhamdulillah, from the Quran to the Sunnah. And there is so much that we can and should tap into, inshallah. And I think that that's kind of the missing piece in the non-religious frameworks for addressing this, is that spiritual void that we sometimes have, and we try and fill it in other ways. And that can come out negatively, subhanAllah. So for us as Islamic school educators and staff to try and fill that and repair that, inshallah, I think is a really beautiful suggestion. Jazakallah khairan for that. I had a couple of other questions.
Shazia, can I quick point?
Yes, yes,
I talk
Madiha.
so much. Just going exactly along what you're saying, and what Dr. Julie mentioned is, as schools, we have to shift away from thinking about punishment for everything. And I know that's really easy to do because you have to find accountability in some way, right? And sometimes, like, the other parent of the child that was bullied is, also looking for it. But again, if we go back to our religious tradition, right, it was about restoring behavior. So we want restorative practices, which still teach accountability, right? You do want to teach the perpetrator accountability. You want them to acknowledge what happened. You want them to understand the harm it caused, and then teach them how to repair it, right? But also their own role in it and why it might have happened. That's restorative, and restorative interventions will work to really reduce the behavior in the long run, instead of if it's just a punishment, like, you did this, I'm going to take this away, this happened, you're like suspended for a day. Literally does nothing. And so again, if we look at how the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ corrected behavior, it was restorative, and we want to have that same approach.
I cannot keep quiet. I love this, Dr. Madiha. I really do, because even in schools, like when we address parenting, and we really stress the point, stay away from even the word punish. Like, we do not punish, we give consequences, because that's teaching responsibility. And there was one question that I read in the chat, that, okay, if we don't take the technology away, then what kind of consequences? And Madiha, you just touched on it, like, on point. Anything that teaches the students and the children and the youth to mend and to fix, if possible, to restore as a community services, that's how they change their behavior. And then the behavior, if it changed quickly, because we do the behavioral plans and the individual behavioral plan, any behavior that changes quickly and immediately, know for sure that it will go back. But the behavior that what we're seeking is a very slow, gradual change of behavior, because that means the student or the youth are processing what's going on and they're building on it. So I had to say that I love the restorative practices.
Thank you so much. It can be really difficult, because sometimes sometimes you as a principal or administrator might feel the pressure of a parent from the student who justifiably feels like there needs to be something that happens, and also there's a lot that we can talk about. I really hope that we have some time, but I want to address the questions. A couple of questions. Somebody asked, can you describe, like, what's a power differential? And maybe that was addressed. I felt like we did kind of have some concrete examples that came through about that. But one more thing that was asked and associated with that was, can teachers be victims of cyberbullying or bullying, either from students or from the administration?
Can you
or
say
teacher
that?
To teacher?
Oh,
yes.
teachers. Okay, teachers.
So could cyberbullying or bullying also happen between adults in schools was the actual question. Teacher to teacher or principal to staff because of the power they have.
I think I said initially that, bullying can happen to anyone. And yeah, it certainly can. It can happen in ways that perhaps even the victim does not quite realize that they're being bullied. So it could happen in a meeting where they are, either repeatedly cut down every time they express an opinion. It could happen in a group chat with other, teachers, an admin. Things can happen like that. So it does happen. The question is, what do we do about it when it does happen? And will that person's voice be heard? Will they, feel like, okay, there is someone here in this organization that will, recognize that this is a problem and work to change it? Not to get rid of anybody, but it's all about creating community, and everybody is at a different point in their life, at a different stage, and we're all working together towards being better. So that's the goal. So there should be an opportunity for that person, whether, like it was said before, anonymously, or, someone they could talk to without feeling they're going to lose their job.
Yeah, that's a real challenge, Dr. Julie. It's a great suggestion, but a real challenge. I don't see many Islamic schools having that kind of openness, or schools in general. Dr. Madiha, did you want to say something?
I was just going to add that I think I wanted to add the student to teacher piece and just address that part of the question, which is that you absolutely can have bullying from students to teachers. The way that the power differential still is important, and the way it plays out is if you've got, we all know, some of us as educators have been in a classroom and your students have completely taken over that classroom and you no longer have, so it's that same idea, but obviously in a much more intense way. So there have been instances, for example, where students have come together to bully a teacher online, whether it's saying things, whether it's posting things. But the key is that it's a group of students. So then they're really undermining her power. That's what makes it bullying.
Madiha, I think that there's another power differential, that the kids know the technology better, right? So they can create a meme of a teacher or teachers and then make it go viral in their community, in their school community. They can, there's also different kinds of cyberbullying in some different ways that we haven't talked about yet. One is just kind of like engaging in name calling. Somebody had posted a question about like their kid, potentially it was about their own child, and how they might be called a nerd because they're doing really well in school, and how can we encourage them to like not let that deter them. That kind of name calling and all of that might happen in the cyber world as well. But there's also reputational harm. You have, like you mentioned at the beginning, Dr. Madiha, a lot of the possibility for creating anonymous accounts. And we know of instances where students have gone in and even just mentioned everyone in a grade or a class or a school or something, and just went through and said something negative about everybody. Or they could cause a false rumor, subhanAllah. Like there's so many more. Another thing that I wanted to briefly mention, I know we're 6 minutes before the end, and again, if there's any other questions, please do send them over to us so that we can ask them before we end. But there's also some instances, we talked about restorative practices. I do see Dr. Catherine's comment too, restorative practices take a lot more time. So one is that. The other thing is, are there ever any instances where there does need to be a punitive consequence? And one instance that I can think of is with sexual harassment and almost like virtual rape in some ways, that I know of personally has happened to individuals, again, some vulnerable populations, where their picture was pasted on a pornographic video. And now it looks like that person was the one who was engaged in those sexual acts. There are some really violent and cruel ways that cyberbullying can take place. what do you say about what is that kind of line where it's like, okay, halas, you're out of the school, for example?
So if I can just, I want us all to know that cyberbullying, like certain levels of cyberbullying, can be considered a crime. And like you can, as a parent and educator, you can call the police and ask for, if it's anonymous, they can track the message, they can track the internet. So yeah, I agree. When we talk about restorative practices, what we're talking about changing behavior when it's consistent, name calling, affect, like it's fixable. But when what you're saying is posting posting those pictures and like sexual harassment, so on, of course there has to be a punitive action taken. And like Dr. Julie said at the very beginning, once you establish the expectations and the rules and the laws, you should include that it can be considered a crime, and this is the hotline, and so on and so forth. And that's part of educating the parents and the teachers and the school staff, and educating the students themselves, high school, middle school, even like elementary, to keep that message, not delete it. Keep that message, keep that, so that you can have documented evidence when you report it, whether to the school staff or to the police or to anyone you're reporting it. But yes, definitely there are like huge crime that you cannot just say, okay, let's fix it, and mental health, wellness, and so on. Yeah.
Thank you.
If I may add one last thing.
Oh, go
on
ahead.
my end, sister. One of the things that I would love for admin, and if there are board members out there, to keep in mind in regard to school climate with traditional bullying and cyberbullying, is to work toward, creating partnerships within your school, with your families, and outside of school. Don't get into the passing the blame buck. It's the teacher's fault, it's the admin's fault, it's the kid's fault, it's the parents' fault. That doesn't help anybody. But what will help is put ugly on the table, talk about it, come up with workable solutions that will help improve everything for everybody. And one last thing, create a tracking system, please, to see what's going on with your vulnerable populations. Have somebody follow them up, make sure that they're supported, so these kids can get through and have a successful school year and feel like they belong.
Yeah, because I was just going to add one last thing, which is that you can absolutely have restorative practices that are that go hand in hand with consequences, right? It doesn't mean that there are not consequences. But what I would recommend each school to create a tier system, right? Of at what point have those boundaries been crossed in which there's just no restoration that's happening, at least in your school context, right? But before that boundary, there are absolutely ways that you can apply, there's certain actions you put into place to protect the safety of whoever is involved, apply your consequences to the perpetrator, but also still work on restoration. So there's different ways to think about that as well. The last piece I just wanted to mention, which is, we oftentimes, our first go-to solution is to make the perpetrator and I don't like saying victim, but the person who's experiencing the bullying, talk to each other. Do not do that. That is not healthy for the person who experienced the bullying to now have to come face to face with the person that did it to them. So we always want to get kids to sit together and say, okay, I want you to talk to each other and figure this out. Most of the times that's not going to work, and it's actually harmful. It's a harmful dynamic. So just navigate that very carefully and think it through before you try to enact that as a solution.
Actually, it empowers the one who is doing the bullying, like when they
Just one
Right.
quick point about positive behavior intervention systems, a whole model available to any school that could really do that tiered system that Sister Madiha is talking about. I'm sure it will be in some of the resources that are there, but it gives schools a guideline as to how to handle this kind of behavior. And it's researched, it works, take a read.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to ask Sister Jana, somebody's asked for the piece making and conflict resolution resource that you mentioned, if you could please send that to us via email, and we'll send it out to everybody along with this recording. Dr. Julie, if you have the link to that. And Dr. Madiha, I know that at the FYI, you all have worked on a digital parenting toolkit as well. And that partnership that Dr. Julie just spoke about with the parents, we can utilize the resources that our amazing organizations like the FYI have created, and inshallah we'll continue to build through our partnerships as well as organizations for your benefit and the benefit of our entire communities. We've got a few more questions coming in. I just wanted to ask one more, if I can ask the panelists to stay for just 5 more minutes, and our constituents, because this actually we didn't address this yet, and I think that it's the biggest piece. So Dr. Madiha, you mentioned about and being anonymous online. So how do we address as schools, as school leaders, how do you handle like an anonymous TikTok account that's bullying students and teachers, maybe creating memes or jokes of specific students and teachers, including their names and stuff like that? Like what is the approach that we take? And I know some of this was addressed, Dr. Julie said, have the policy, but when you don't even know who it is and there's no way to figure it out, that's the thing. Like, what do you do?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I don't know if I have an answer, but I know that one of the things, I don't know how this might work in the school context, but I know what families have done is there are ways. One, like we have to educate ourselves on the apps, and we need to get a better understanding of how the apps work, because there are, unless beyond being like a cybersecurity IT guy or girl, there are ways to find things out. We just don't know them. And so we really need to educate ourselves. Like there are ways that there are technologies you can purchase for routers, for example, that help you track down where the information is coming from. You can also get, there are parts of like your phone plan where you can get information about what sites are being accessed, what IP addresses are coming into your router. There are things that you can also do on the computer. So there are some ways to get at that anonymity. We just need to do our research to try to understand what's happening. To be honest, beyond that, I don't really know. I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to find out who it is, or do we just want to cope with what's happening? That decides which way you want to take your action plan.
And
so I think
fair, Dr. Madiha. I don't mean to end on a note where it's like, well, we don't know, but that's the truth, right? We don't know what new apps are going to be, what new ways are going to be to engage in this kind of harassment. But we do know the tools, in particular within our Islamic schools and our Islamic tradition, for cultivating the character, the kindness. There are some other resources. Somebody has asked about, how do we even bring awareness about bullying? And I do want to mention that the FYI does have a bullying workshop they can do at your school. The ISLA has also worked with them to bring it broad scale online. So whatever works for you all, we invite you to do that. We are at the end of our time. I do want to take a minute to let you all know that we have taken notes. We will be sharing these with you, inshallah. There's going to be more resources than these key takeaways. And also, alhamdulillah, this is something that we're actually really focused on this year. We're going to be hosting the ISLA Leadership Retreat, alhamdulillah, in person for the first time since COVID, December 2nd through 4th in Dallas, Texas. Your title funds might be able to cover the fees if you have title funds at your school. So ask your administrator, or if you are an administrator, look into this. We're talking about healing-centered Islamic schools, and that means not just focusing. Yes, we need to focus on the whole child, but we ourselves need to be healed. We need to be connected to our communities, to our parents, our families. And what are the ways in which we do that? We'll, inshallah, be engaged in that in Dallas, Texas, inshallah. Do join our listserv if you're not already part of it. We'll also place the link for that in our follow-up email. I'm going to let our panelists, if they have a 30-second or 15-second concluding statement that they'd like to make, to do so. And I want to thank you all so much for spending part of your evening. To all of our panelists, Dr. Madiha, Dr. Julie, Sister Rana, Sister Lisa, our ISLA team as well, Dr. Samra Isam, And all of you amazing educators, board members, teachers, principals who are here with us, thank you so much for what you do. May Allah bless you. Let us keep each other in our du'as, inshallah. Sister Rana, Dr. Madihar, Dr. Julie, any concluding thoughts or statements?
It's not a conclude. Thank you so much for having us. I just want to ask the principals, if we have principals of Islamic schools, to look into an app that's called Go Guardian. It's not an app, it's a program that in our school, we use it to monitor all the Chromebooks. Every teacher has access to Go Guardian. So that will minimize to maximally minimize the anonymity of any like message, the anonymity of the interacting within the school building, and within, like when we were virtual from homes, if they are using the our school's Chromebooks and apps and so on. So Go Guardian is an excellent program that can minimize the cyberbullying or the anonymity of the cyberbullying. And thank you so much for having me again.
Thank you, Sister Rana.
So just quickly, Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thanks for having me. And just a reminder to schools, keep taking the temperature of your school climate. Make sure that these kids don't fall through the cracks. Each and every one of them is precious and they are in our care. And inshallah, we can get to it with good programming and with excellent professional development and continuous talking, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much, Dr. Julie.
Jazakallah khair, Shaza. I just wanted to, say Jazakallah khair to ISLA to hosting this and for supporting probably the hardest job that exists. And I really look forward to, I know we really touched each topic very surface level today. The goal was really to hear from you all what everybody is experiencing. So inshallah, I really look forward to building on that with more resources, with, partnering with ISLA to make that happen, inshallah. So Jazakallah khair.
Thank you so much. Jazakallah khair. Yes, we will be sending this recording. It's also on Facebook on our ISLA web, on our ISLA page on Facebook. We'll be sending this recording. Please do share it with others in your schools as well. We have a lot to learn from you. Alhamdulillah, we have some links being put here in the chat, which we'll gather, inshallah, and share with you in our resource email that will go out, inshallah, by Monday. Jazakumullah khairan, thank you so much. May Allah accept from us, and please do forgive us for our shortcomings here at the ISLA. You've given us so much of your time, your most precious commodity. Please do keep us all in each other's du'as, inshallah. And may Allah send his choicest blessings onto the beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Let him truly be our role model and guide, that he may also be the role model of our children. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.
Jazakallah.